Hello, good morning. Morning room, thank you for coming. My name is Eliza Anyangwe. The more I do this, the more I am fully aware that there is an embarrassment of riches in terms of options for where you could be. So I'm really, really glad that you're here with us. Thank you for making that choice. Welcome, welcome. So I'm just going to make sure you can see what I can see. You're also here for a very special, I'm going to big this up, it's not that exciting, but you just have to go with me. I've been told by the organizers that this is the first ever PechaKucha style presentation. Right? Thank you. The 4 people who I paid. Thank you. Okay, so it's going to be fabulous. It's hopefully going to be fast-paced, and hopefully it's going to be full of lessons and tips and wisdom from the journalists who you see before you. Is this changing automatically, or am I? This is not yet PechaKuchaing. Let's see. Yes, that is now a verb. How do my device is unruly. Okay, pause. Welcome to this event that is organized by the Gender Beat. The Gender Beat is a collaborative project. If you can, let's just see if the QR code works. The Gender Beat is a collaborative project started to promote gender journalism, to really think about building community, think about the resources and tips and tools that gender journalists need to understand that gender journalism is stories about women, stories by women, and stories about patriarchy, so systemic stories, and really trying to put sort of, third world first, if you like, valorize the skills and expertise of journalists around the world. It is possible to do the Gender Beat work because CNN as Equals, which is CNN's gender reporting team, is facilitating that work this year. So there will be 3 Gender Beat events brought to you, if you will, by CNN as Equals. The speakers on the stage today are not all CNN speakers. They have done fantastic journalism for lots of different organizations. You will hear about individual stories as well as projects that report across many stories. The idea is that our speakers will take you through the best practice of what they did, how they made the choices they made, in the same way that you would come to an event about war reporting or being a foreign correspondent or, climate reporting, to really just take the stories that happen to half of the world's population seriously. And of course, every time you hear us talking about women, please understand that definition is expansive to include women and gender diverse people as well. So first up, you will have Meera. So the idea is it is PechaKucha Light. If you have done PechaKucha before, which is 20 slides in 7 minutes, with very little, I know people are sweating in the audience, so spare a thought for my speakers. The heat on the stage is ridiculous because they are panicking. It is PechaKucha Light because the slides are not going to automatically change themselves. I will do that, but we will try and keep to the 7-minute time limit per speaker to allow just a little bit of time at the end if you have any questions for the speakers to ask them about their projects. So we will go one through to the next, not necessarily in the order that you see them here, but in all 7 minutes each. So thank you so much for your rapt attention, and let's get started. Okay, so Meera Senthilingam, who's an editor at CNN on the gender team. I can't even remember what our team is called. That's how excited I am for you, Meera. Thank you. As Equals, is up first. So Meera, take us through your presentation.
Okay, here we go first. So I'll start by saying that, is it?
No, it is.
In 2021, our team, as Equals, decided to launch a series called White Lies, Exposing the Dangers of Skin Whitening. And the idea was to really put a spotlight on this issue, the global nature of this issue, and frame it in ways that it hadn't been before, essentially. To look at the kind of whole industry behind it, the culture that was fueling it, the health harms associated with this hugely global practice that's a multi-billion-dollar industry globally. And it was a year-long series that we kind of touched on all of these issues by reporting from different regions of the world, the point being to then highlight just how global the issue is and the practice and so on by the reporting that we were doing. And this next photo, I just included it because it was a photo we included in one of our stories from Rwanda, and I think it just gets across just how potent some of the products that we're talking about here are, especially the ones that contain harmful ingredients like mercury, steroids, hydroquinone. The fact that this much pigment can be stripped from your skin, I think shows you just gets across the real kind of potency of these products. But the story within this, all of this that we're here to talk about today is this one, this exclusive that's basically about a woman, a mother. This issue predominantly affects women worldwide. And this mother had been using products like these that were containing mercury, readily available to her through her local mall for years. And whilst symptoms initially started out as her kind of losing her getting insomnia, developing leg pain, she ultimately lost her peripheral vision. And also by using these creams for a long time, her whole house became contaminated with mercury, and her home and her family were put at risk as a result, unknowingly as well, because it needs to be known that we made clear that these products never say they have mercury in them. You can't see it, you can't smell it. And the story really needed to have two parts, two equal focuses. This woman, this mother's story, and that the risk her family were at because of these products as well. So the way we decided to tell the story was to have those two parts, but to also really visually get across a lot of the numbers, the data, the scale of the problem. So here you'll see, for example, that this is the amount of mercury that was found in the home, and the fact that where it's found in the home is very varied. So in this instance, that levels in the house were much higher in children's bedrooms and in the washing machine, which in itself is a huge concern. The mother herself, by the time she was seen by doctors, levels of mercury in her blood were 9 times higher than what are considered acceptable. These products contain tens of thousands of times higher levels of mercury than are permitted, and it was all of that we wanted to get across in the story visually. But the key point was that this story brought together everything we wanted to say about this issue in one story. It brought together the culture, the industry, and it had this human face, a reality that helped people relate to the problem, and the fact that it was happening in the US as well so readily helped our audiences engage with it even more. And we got the story by working very closely with these 3 agencies, essentially. When we started the series, we established relationships with all of the key agencies, organizations, and experts working in this area, a key one being Minnesota. They have a huge concern, and they have a lot of grants and government support for this issue. And we saw that through some of the work that they've done. And they regularly, for example, update this product list, highlighting lots of products that contain high levels of mercury. But the issue is that whilst they promote this in their communities, you're seeing tens of people at most kind of accessing these pages. So what was really needed was something from a big media platform to really put a spotlight on this issue that was going underreported. A huge public health crisis, really, affecting women across the US, across the world, that was largely going underreported. So by having this relationship with them, essentially over a year, for several months, we kept in contact, we saw the work they were doing, we asked them to keep us posted about updates and what they were doing, but we just needed to wait patiently for the right story. And that meant waiting for a case. And so when they brought this case to us, essentially, I need to flag that the key point here was that they couldn't actually give us a case. Legally, as a government agency, they can't encourage people to speak to the media. They're not allowed to lead them in that way. They can't bring us information, even though they're constantly working with people using these products. So we essentially had to find a way to get around that. And the way to do that was through a clinician who, because medical cases can always be written up in this way. So them knowing clinicians, us knowing them, led to a year-long relationship that meant that a clinician can bring this case and give it to us exclusively to give it all the attention that we wanted to. We then worked closely with TV for it to have maximum impact as well as the digital audiences. And you'll see here that when we released it, it had huge pickup, both internationally and domestically, that really gave this issue the prominence it needed. The search interest in the topic went up. The audiences to these pages by Minnesota basically increased massively in traffic, but interestingly, traffic was not just in the US anymore. They shared kind of data with me showing that traffic came from across platforms. But there are a couple of things that I would like to do differently if we ran this story again. What you see here is a TikTok video by somebody who saw our article, She then went to the product list. She found that one of the products she uses regularly was on there. She then went and did a blood test for herself and found that she had really high levels of mercury in her blood. She had absolutely no idea. She posted a TikTok. She has a really big following in Minnesota, and that led to even more people going to these product pages and reaching out to the health department as well. And the health department also told me that by people reaching out, they've then done home visits and met people who are using products that are containing these high levels. So I think if we were to run it again, I'd want to maybe capture the audiences in those young women who are being targeted by these products, to kind of have a more kind of focused social way of storytelling, as well as the kind of digital and TV ways that we went about for even greater impact. Although I will say we're hugely proud of the story because it really reached a large audience and has led to a lot of people reaching out about the issue ever since. Oh, that was fast.
Feel free to whoop, people. Yeah. All right, the bar has been set high. Please do write down your questions. Think about what you want to understand better, what you might want us to come back to after each of the presentations are finished. Also think about if you have any things that you want us to explain a little further, because the pace, the speed at which we are talking, it's Speedy Gonzalez up here. So please make sure that you are noting down any things that you want us to revisit. Thank you so much, Meera. That was a fantastic presentation. Okay, up next is Reade Levinson, who is from Reuters. Welcome, Reade.
Hi, everyone. My name is Reade. I'm an investigative reporter with Reuters. I'm here to talk about a series that we published in December about the Nigerian military and some of the human rights abuses they've been committing in their fight against Boko Haram and ISWAP in the Northeast. So if you're unfamiliar with Nigeria, the military has been fighting an insurgency since at least 2009. Boko Haram used to be the main faction, but since 2014, it's been the Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP. So we've now published 5 stories in the series. I sent in these slides before we'd published the 5th one yesterday, but I'll focus most of my time talking about the first story we did, which was about an abortion program run by the military in secret since at least 2013 to abort the pregnancies of women and girls who've been kidnapped by insurgents and fallen pregnant. So these women have been, are we going faster than 20 seconds? Maybe. Stressful. These women and girls have been kidnapped, forced to marry, they've fallen pregnant, and then they've either escaped or been rescued by the military, and while in military custody, they've been forced to have an abortion. Many of them didn't even know they were pregnant. They didn't know what was happening, and they only realized that they were having an abortion once they started bleeding. So for this story, we spoke to 33 women and girls who said they underwent abortions while in military custody. Just one told us that she had given consent, and some were as young as 12 years old. So this photo is of a hospital in Maiduguri. We reviewed copies of hospital registers and military documents that described hundreds and thousands of procedures. And based on these documents and also our interviews, we estimated conservatively that at least 10,000 women and girls had their pregnancies aborted through this program in the last 10 years. And I want to emphasize this was truly a group effort. So here you can see some of the other locations where the abortion program went on. My colleague Paul Karsten started reporting on this back in 2020. I joined the project along with David Lewis and Libby George in 2021. This was 3 years of reporting before we published. Our second story, which I'll just touch on briefly, was about the practice of killing children by the military. The reason behind this was the same as for the abortion program. There's a belief among military members and also among some civilians that the blood of insurgents carries through generations. So the children of an insurgent father will grow up to join Boko Haram, join ISWAP, and so we spoke to soldiers and guards. One is pictured here to protect his privacy. We took a photo like this. And you can see that he's saying he's going to go after these children because he sees them as the future of Boko Haram. To publish the massacre story, we went in detail on 6 incidents. One in this town of Kukawa in the northeast of Nigeria. It was difficult reporting, in large part because we had to do it completely secretly. Most of the people we spoke to were terrified of reprisals by the military. And to tell the story of the massacre in Kukawa, we spoke to witnesses, including 2 fathers whose teenage sons had gone missing the day that the military invaded and never come home. They found evidence of a mass grave out west of town. So I was asked to talk about impact. I think we're still waiting to see the impact of our reporting. As often is the case with reporting, it can take years. Initially, the military denied anything had gone on. Since then, they've agreed to an investigation. They are cooperating with, Nigeria has a National Human Rights Commission. They started investigating in February. We don't know when they will publish the results of their investigation. What we've seen so far is not encouraging. It's difficult. We're not sure they have the ability to really hold the military to account. So I think we're still waiting to see the impact of the series. But one thing we did write about in the fourth story published here is about the dilemma faced by the international community to hold the military to account. So the US and the UK especially have close ties with Nigeria's military, and there are lots of reasons for this. One reason, for example, is that the insurgency is thought of as part of the global fight against terrorism. And another, Nigeria is super important for all of Africa, and so I think it's seen as a key country for many countries, including the UK. So here you can see there was an international outcry when we first published, a lot of calls to investigate, but we are still waiting, really, for what will happen next. And I just want to talk a bit about some of the challenges we faced. I think some of the hardest things about reporting and the ways we, the solutions that we found, I wish we'd found earlier. I think that's the only thing I would do differently. Speaking to women about their experiences undergoing abortions was very difficult, in large part because, as many people in the room probably know, speaking with witnesses who've undergone serious trauma affects their memory, and it's difficult to pin down dates and times and details. And sometimes when women were telling their stories, they would bring in stories from other women who'd experienced similar things and tell that as their own story. So it took a lot of reporting, years of interviews to figure out the real details. The other thing is, the things you take for granted reporting, I reported in Europe and in the US before this, is that you take for granted your sources will have a cell phone, so you can contact them again. Some of the women didn't have cell phones, and this was difficult if they hadn't told their family members or their husbands about what had happened, because when we needed to set up an interview, but they hadn't told their family members who had the phone what was going on, we had to be really careful. And, they didn't have smartphone for secure phone calls, so everything had to be done in person. We also needed to destroy our notes and speak when we could over encrypted lines to make sure that everyone was protected. Also, we learned early on some tips for getting more details from the story. So we talked to some experts in interviews with people who'd undergone trauma. We would ask women for details of what had happened that morning. What did they have for breakfast the day they were kidnapped? What was the weather like, to try and spark, that level of detail in their memory before we got into the actual traumatic events. And we also learned to go off of growing seasons and religious holidays instead of asking for calendar years, because a lot of the women hadn't gone off the calendar. Like, we're so used to checking our phone whenever anything happens or marking things online. And you could ask the women how many years ago something happened and they wouldn't know. But if you asked how many Ramadans they had celebrated, they would tell you. And then you could calculate the year. If you asked, how many weeks after Salah, how many weeks before Eid, they could tell you. And time of day, similar thing. When was the sun in the sky? How close was it to dinner? So yeah, I think I'll just end on saying that I hope this inspires people to do this kind of reporting, even though it's difficult to pin down the details we're used to having at our fingertips as journalists. It is possible to do this kind of story, even if you can't, even if it takes a while to kind of get to the years and dates aspects.
Fantastic. That was bang on 6:35. Well done. All right. Up next is a different type of presentation from Esther, who is the Chief Content Officer. I got told yesterday not to call her the Editor-in-Chief. The Chief Content Officer at the Star in Malaysia. But Esther, handing over to you.
Thank you. I'll be very fast. I'm Esther. I'm Chief Content Officer, which is a glamorous name for Editor-in-Chief. They decided to call me Chief Content Editor because, Chief Content Officer, so they could just put everything under me, the social media, the data, and everything. So we used to have two bosses, one print, one digital. Now they lump it all into one, and this is the idiot sitting in front of you. But yeah, let's go. 2 lines, sorry, just 2 lines, okay? 2 lines about what Star is about. We are traditional. We started off as a traditional media. We are a newspaper. I think we are one of the very few print products. Sorry. Which just increased pages. We started in April. I mean, just a few weeks ago, we actually increased our pages, which is why I lost more hair. But we started off as a traditional media, and then we branched off to, we were the first in Malaysia to go digital. That was in 1995. But it was more of a cheat because it was just the digitalized version of our print product. And now it's a different animal by itself. We have social media, and I started the data journalism about a few years ago. We learned everything via the internet, and we were just a two-man team. And last year we won some award, and I show off quite a bit. I would like to think we are on our way to transform ourselves, but yeah, there's a long way to go. Women has always been, issues concerning women have always been very big with us at the Star. We always had a core women's desk, and we study issues like gender inequality, general bias, women empowerment. But you know, the Star being 52 years old, I inherited a lot of legacy as well. One of it is to consign women issues to the women's desk. So that was something that I wanted to change when I took over as CCO 5 years ago. When the pandemic happened, a lot of things happened. We carried stories about how women suffered from anguish, and there were so many mental issues concerning women and suicides concerning women, and we just couldn't sit down, and we just got to do something. So when the pandemic happened, we decided to do a year-long project on women empowerment. We divided into 4 parts. It's women and different slides. Okay, it's women and in the workforce, challenges in the industry, and how much unpaid work do you actually do at home. I'll get into that later. So it was our job to tell the stories on the Asian perspective. I think this is no doubt a global issue, but the Asian woman has her own sorts of challenges. We have our own cultural conventions that we have to live with. So in the Break the Bias stories, we wanted to tell the stories of these Asian women, and we invited our partners from the rest of Asia to the regional to join us in this quest. Because Malaysia is, after all, truly Asia, we wanted to start it off first. So we had the story about how women dropped out of the workforce because of the pandemic to look after the kids at home, to wash at home and cook at home, and take care of their in-laws. So we interviewed associations to come up with how much to actually earn. I mean, as cooks, cleaners, and caregivers, and we had the Malaysian number, and we wanted to do that regionally. We wanted to get the Asian region's number. Okay, COVID-19 greatly compounded the long-standing problem of inequality. That was what the year-long project was about. How did I organize the work? As I said, we had a core desk, but I wanted to break that pattern of just leaving women issues to the women's desk alone. So I got the entire platform to work on it, from the hardcore news desk all the way to Focus and our data team. So it was 4-pronged: women in the workforce, challenges of women workers, the values of unpaid work, and the regional comparison. While this was a 4-parter, in the end we came up with 58 stories, not just print. It was data stories as well, and we had TikToks, and it centered around, we wrote stories around what was happening as well. We had quite a few things, a few bills which was passed last year, and among it was the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, and the Malaysian Employment Act was also amended to allow women to take 98 maternity leave instead of 60. It was just passed a few months ago. The challenges I encountered, I had both internal problems and external, sorry, not problems, challenges. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, I had a lot of manpower problems. When I joined the Star some time ago, Star is my first job, we had 800 people. We are down to 300 under me now, and we do everything, you know. Okay, so during because this project was last year, was still thick in the middle of the pandemic, and most of the reporters were covering the pandemic and the actual statistics, the state of the nation as well, and we had our general elections as well, so we didn't have many people. So my challenge was to get some of the people from other desks to join me in this quest. We did in the end, but I wish I had more people to do this seriously. Externally, I had a lot of challenges externally. Well, I can whip my team to do whatever that is needed to do to make this project a success. I couldn't whip my partners, my friends from the major media houses around the region to do the same. We are part of ANN. We are most of them are also part of our World Editors Forum, but we have known each other for a long time. Yes, we are partners. We are a group of 24 media houses in Asia, but I don't know. It could be that the women issues might not be very important for them. I don't know. I'm just assuming. Okay, very fast. Okay. What I would do to improve the story, I would, I would probably start up a committee from one person per desk instead of having a committee of people passionate about the subject. While passion is important, strategy is also important. So I should have also set up a committee just to engage with our regional partners. Oh God! All right. Last sentence. You're cruel. Okay. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to say that the impact. Okay, the impact. I'm glad to note that hardcore reporters from news desks. I started off as news reporter, so I've always been with news desks. I'm glad that we got some of them to sit up and realize that issues concerning women are not women issues. They affect every level of governance, and I'm very glad that via this project they set up. Thank you.
Wonderful. You could have shaved 30 seconds off if you didn't do the explanation about CEO, COO. But it's important. It is important. All right. Thank you so much, Esther. Over to you now, Bhanupriya Rao, who is the founder of BehanBox in India. Welcome.
Thank you, Eliza. I'm Bhanupriya. I'm from a founder of a very small gender media outlet called BehanBox. And today I want to tell you the story of 1 million women. And these million women are who hold up the entire healthcare system in India. These are called ASHA workers. ASHA is accredited social health activists, and please pay special attention to the word activist because it matters. The next photograph is in 2020, can you go? in 2022, they were awarded the World Health Organization's Global Leadership Award. And this is from the National Health Mission in India, congratulating them. But in 2020, there were 1 million faceless women invisible to the entire system. And in 2020, when we started BehanBox, we started with a project looking at who these women were, what was their role in the pandemic, what were they, how invisible were they, and all of those. But when we started looking into their lives, we realized that there was no data available about them. There were several questions: who were they, what were they being paid, and as health was a state subject, it was very different for each of the 30 states in India. And so as two people, we just started off calling people, calling the union leaders, and finding out more about their lives. The lady you see on the right is Minara Begum. When the pandemic started, when I got in touch with her, she had just sold off a mobile phone for 2,000 rupees, just for 2,000 rupees to buy a bag of rice for her family. So that's how poor and worse off they were. So when we were talking to them, what we realized was that they were, for the work in the pandemic, they were being paid rupees 33, which is about 41 cents a day. That was what they were being paid, and on top of that, they were not receiving any protective gear for doing most of the frontline work. These were the workers that were actually carrying the heavy load of COVID pandemic on their shoulders. This, along with all of the other regular work that they were doing, which is maternal and child health. So if India's maternal and child health indicators have improved over the years, it is because of these ASHA workers. They were also carrying out vaccination drives, and some of those pictures you see in the toughest of circumstances they were working, and they had without any of the protections. So what we set out to do was, through our calls across 16 states in India, we collected data on how they were being paid, whether they were being paid on time, how many months have they not been paid for, how much do they actually make, how much of their assets were they pawning off to make their ends meet during the pandemic and before. And what we collected was this rich, very rich data set. And what that showed us was that even the best state in India, and this is a photograph from an ASHA worker in Kerala, which is one of the best states in India for healthcare, public healthcare, even that state was not treating its ASHA workers very well. When we published, and we started putting out their stories on social media, just small recorded clips of all of that, all things that they were saying. This was the first time that any media outlet was reaching out to them and asking for their life stories. So with their consent, we started putting that out, and they reached out to us after a while, telling us for all the protests that they were making, that they were doing, they were actually being criminalized. There were FIRs against them, and the media wasn't bothering to cover that. So we started putting out that as well. And in the meanwhile that we were sanitizing, collecting, and organizing all of the data and the life stories, we were putting out stuff on social media. And what the impact that it led was that now we published it collaboratively with another outlet called Article 14, which works on human rights issues. And the issue kind of blew up. So the government started to take notice, international media started to take notice, local media started to take notice, and all of that brought into the sharp focus the work that these women who were invisible to everyone, to the system most particularly, had started to kind of take notice. While doing this work, what we also realized was, and this is essentially our sort of life, our origin story, but also BehanBox's work that we want to focus on, was the very patriarchal nature of the state. Right? Through this work, what we realized was essentially what some of them were saying, that the idea of women's work in the state's conception is very patriarchal. It's unpaid work, which you're extending it to the entire community, for which you don't need to receive much money. You can do it without social security, without benefits. And what that led us to do is focus a lot more on women's work and looking at the very neoliberal structure of the state, which is turning into women's work into more contractual, more informal labor without the rights and protections and social security, and the very important laws like the POSH Act, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, the Maternity Benefits Act, and so on. What we also realized doing this work was that we have to keep a focus on the big picture while also looking at the smaller stories that make up the big picture, which is essentially women's work, which is what we are focusing on a lot these days. But what we also learned doing this project, and that built up into what we do a lot, is to look at it from the point of view of change. What is the change we want to bring? How, as journalists and media outlets, where is our position in that pipeline of change? What solidarities, what collaborations we need to build? So at the moment, we are thinking a lot around that. That project also taught us that you cannot do this work alone. You have to take the messaging to rights groups, advocacy groups, and a lot of other media groups and non-media groups for it to actually bring in some change. Oh, and the last bit, that the little change that we were about to bring with this kind of reporting was the government of India actually increased the COVID incentive for another 6 months, a pittance of 41 cents for another 6 months for our ASHA workers. That's all we were able to manage, but we were able to sort of bring them to attention, bring the issue to attention, so, and build on this work. So this work doesn't stop, it goes on forever.
Wow. I hope you agree with me. We have one more, that it is really valuable to hear the experiences of independent platforms, of journalists working within large newsrooms, of doing the work that we do, of hearing the experiences from across the world, of different types of investigations and stories. So I really very much look forward to your engagement once Claire has done her presentation. Claire is an independent investigative journalist, used to run 50-50, Open Democracy's 50-50 project, and reported the story with Nana Dakwa Sechama for CNN. So please tell us about your investigation.
Okay, and I'm going to try to be very quick. So last year, a new anti-LGBT bill in Ghana was in the international news, supported by conservative religious groups that would criminalize even identifying as non-heterosexual or being supportive of LGBT rights. At the same time, governments around the world, including major aid donors to Ghana, were making really strong vocal commitments to support LGBT rights around the world. And as we found out, there were financial flows connecting these two sides, the pro-LGBT rights donors and the anti-LGBT rights religious groups, including direct transactions of UK aid money to a group called the Christian Council of Ghana. Just some examples of the transactions there. The story that came out of this revealed how millions of dollars in Western aid money had flowed to these religious groups in Ghana, despite years of their campaigning against the same LGBT rights that the donors said that they supported. So we dove, to create this story, we dove into international aid data sources and found that more than $5 million in total had flowed to, or at least 5 million, had flowed to projects involving or benefiting these religious groups from Germany, Italy, the UK, and the US. In addition to a text story about these findings that we published with CNN's As Equals section, they sent a film crew to Ghana to produce a video package as well to create a more multidimensional story. There were a lot of challenges in producing this, which the story necessarily dealt with sensitive issues. So people who could, for example, explain the human cost of these anti-LGBT activities were hard to find to interview and to think through how to do that sensitively and protect their safety and identities. There was also a lot of data in this story, obviously, and the data sets used are not particularly accessible or easy to navigate. So we had to go through thousands of rows of data for each year that we looked at and deal with all the various discrepancies in how donors present it. And it was also challenging to get meaningful responses from the donors to what we had found, that is, funding that conflicted with their stated values. There was a bit of a see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil theme to their responses, which was frustrating. But in terms of things that we would do differently if we were to do this again, I think one is definitely about seeing these kind of investigations as marathons, not sprints. And that also involves like a lot of post-publication work to follow things up, spread the information, make sure different stakeholders have it, and to continue demanding answers. Ghana is also, of course, not the only country in Africa that's currently witnessing a very extreme anti-LGBT backlash, and it's also not the only aid recipient in the continent. So looking across countries could have been a way maybe to help reveal even more systemic problems with how donor promises and donor funding practices don't align. Also, if it's happened in one place, it's reasonable to think maybe it's happened somewhere else. And if it's happened today, maybe it's happened before too. So winding back the clock could have also helped us understand a bit more the systemic nature of this problem. Collaboration is essential for this kind of work, across borders as well as across different backgrounds. So I'm an investigative data journalist based in Italy, one of the donor countries, and my brilliant co-author in the front row is a Ghanaian feminist activist, brilliant Ghanaian feminist African feminist activist based in Ghana, and we can go to the next slide. There can also be a lot of ups and downs in this work too. Things can work well until they don't. You can take 2 steps forward in terms of understanding a story and then 1 step backwards again and again. In the end, we were really pleased to get this story out there, and that also its findings made an episode of the Amanpour program that helped give it a higher profile. And I was also asked to speak last month at a conference of the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which is otherwise largely attended by government policy and technical people, to talk about this story and try to understand a bit more how this could have happened. NGOs and groups, including the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, which is based in Berlin, have also taken interest in this work and are looking at how to follow it up. While this was a very specific project, it also had things in common with others. So to start, it was about a story behind the story. So the Ghana anti-LGBT bill was in the news. The donor commitments to LGBT rights were in the news. But the funding connections between these two things that you wouldn't expect to go together were not. So it was very much a story behind the story. The data used, including from this International Aid Transparency Initiative, can also be used in other stories too. And this open aid is open aid data, and it's gotten increasingly detailed and more useful, particularly in the last few years. And there's different platforms you can access it through, but dPortal was one of them. But the most significant tip, and to wrap up, is that I'd give from this project is that it's about bringing together different people, perspectives, and skill sets, and that's where the real magic happens that you can't always predict.
Wonderful. All right, you have heard from 5 speakers. We have 15 minutes left for your questions, for your engagement. We would love as much interaction from you as we can. There is a microphone. Who is feeling bold? Oh, wow. We're going to start at the back and work our way to the front. If you can please ask your question, tell us what your name is so that we can refer to you by your name. And if you ask a question, tell us which speaker it's addressed to. If you're making a comment, please make it brief so we can include as many people as possible.
Sure. My name is Vicky. I'm a reporter for TVO in Canada. So my question is really, I believe our friend from BehanBox mentioned, getting the consent of her sources. I would love to hear more from all of the panelists about how you manage getting consent specifically from women and vulnerable minorities.
Do you want to take that, Bhanu?
Yeah, I think it is pretty important. It's something we stress on quite a lot when we work with our reporters, especially, and I can speak from India's point of view, where the intersections and the kind of the diversity there are axes of different axes of oppression. There is regional, there's religion, there is caste, which is insidious. And underlying all of this is patriarchy, where the idea that women ought to have a certain place and not speak, and so on, and especially in the rural and other areas as well. So it is important to sort of keep that seeking consent is something we stress on quite a lot. And we feel, what we also tell our reporters is, is that, when working with them, if there is, there are ways in which to sort of handle that. If you are, able to sort of take them aside and talk to them if they wish to remain anonymous. That is something that we encourage a lot because it's not necessary to have names and faces and all to tell that story. The story is very important. Each voice is valid, even if they have no name or so on. So consent, it is very tough, but it is something, what we have noticed while doing the work as well is that there is a greater eagerness to now speak out as well. So finding, also when you're working with communities, there are organizations that have inroads within the communities, so it makes sense to go through them and then seek consent and work in as sensitive a manner as possible because their lives are really at stake and threat.
Because there are many people who might have questions, I won't ask all the panelists, but I think this was also really pertinent. In your presentation, Reade, and you've spoken a bit to it, can you give a few brief remarks, and then I'll come to Meera and then take the next question?
Yeah, I would say consent for us was really important, and I think understanding, I think we as reporters working for Reuters, which is a huge international organization, we had a much better understanding than our sources did oftentimes of what the impact would be for our story. So it was helping to explain to them just how big the impact might be when they decided whether or not they wanted to talk to us, and also making sure, there were a lot of people who worked on this project who we couldn't name for security reasons, making sure that everyone involved knew that consent was an ongoing process. And during the interview, we made it clear to women that if they want to take a break, if there was something they weren't comfortable answering, that was completely okay, and making sure everyone was aware of that. And so for anyone participating in the interview, that if they even saw a hint that a woman wasn't comfortable or wanted a rest, that that was fine and we would just stop.
And just to add, actually, just with our story, the women didn't want to be identified in this story, and we had to make sure we worked really closely with all of the teams involved. We just about agreed to be able to say that it was a woman, just because this issue affects women so much, and we wanted to be able to make that clear. But we didn't include how many children she has, and I think in the end we decided not to. Her child, who had elevated levels of mercury in their blood, we decided not to reveal their gender either, And I think it was agreed, because of the high Somali population in the state, we were able to state her ethnicity, just because it's an issue that's largely affecting that population and the Hmong population in the state. But yeah, that we had to actually, even though we didn't identify the person, we had to work really carefully to make sure that you could not tell who this woman was in the state when telling this story, especially because it became so national.
All right, can we take the next question, please? Again, continuing to work our way forward. If you keep your hand up, we'll take the gentleman there. We're coming forward. Try and get you all.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Peter Young. I'm a freelance reporter. This is also for Bhanupriya. I was recently reporting in Bangladesh, actually, on the Shasta Shebika program, which is similar to its community health scheme, and similar issues there too. But actually, what particularly interested me in was when you mentioned, I suppose, the way that you're working with these women over sort of a continual process. And one thing I'm particularly interested in is sort of making my reporting a bit more collaborative and maybe it's sort of discursive and involving those in the reporting. And I was just wondering if you could speak a bit to the point of how you sort of communicated with those women and sort of what mediums that was through and how it worked exactly.
Yeah, thank you. I think I read your story on Bangladesh's women workers. When we did the first round of this project, it was the thick of pandemic. This was April 2020. So the only way we could do that was through phone at that time. And also one of the challenges which I couldn't it skipped my mind while I was talking was, one of the challenges was that India's women health workers are so overworked. They're working 15 to 20 hours a day. So for them to take out time to speak to a reporter or a person who just wants to understand their lives, they don't have time for that. They have to go back to their families and cook food and do all of the other things associated with it. So it was pretty challenging, but our first round of this project, we entirely relied on the chain of talking to the union leaders first, getting the larger picture, getting the larger data set and everything, and then going into talking to individual ASHA workers to get their life stories and so on. In the second round, and we've done several rounds of this now, in the second round, we had by then, because of our work, we were pretty known, and we had a larger network, and we had some more money, so we had a larger network of researchers go out there in the community and talk to not just ASHA workers, but other allied workers, like those working with children's health services and those working with the midday meals and so on. So the other report was a bigger report on women workers. And particularly in this case, I would say it is not that challenging, because these women are wanting to speak. They want a platform to be heard from. You know, they've been protesting for the last 15 odd years for social security and a full-time work profile, and to be recognized as a member of the healthcare workforce. So it wasn't really a challenge then to get them to speak to you as much as it was to portray their life stories and the data and the combination of it in as impactful a manner as possible.
All right. Why don't we take a couple together so that we are increasing the chances of having all the questions from the floor as possible. If you keep coming down the front, we'll take these two hands that were here, please.
Hi, my name is Rona Maya. I work with the Solutions Journalism Network. One thing I tend to notice is that even when it's a female or a woman story, men have a role to play in it. I don't just mean the obvious role of being maybe in some case the aggressor, or maybe being, being that general thing of patriarchy. But I'm quite interested to always know what the role of men are. In your story, let me give an example. We had a solution story where the problem was affecting women, but men were actually running the solution. So I'm quite curious, in your stories, what roles are you seeing men play on both sides? Aggressor, attacker, I'm just curious, thanks.
And question for Esther. I wanted to just, my name is Janice Littlejohn. I'm an independent journalist in Los Angeles, California. And Esther mentioned passion is important, but strategy is also equally as important. And I was just wondering if you could delve into that just a little bit more on the strategy end of things.
Why don't we take the last one on this side, and then we'll take those together.
Hi, my name is Anada Akwa. My question is for Meera. You'd mentioned that if you were to do the story again, you would look at how you access young women through social media. I'm curious to hear more about what you would do in that case.
Okay, why don't we do it this way, panel? Meera, we start with your question, then Esther. Banu, if you don't mind, we skip you on this occasion because you've just had a couple, and then if the last two speakers take the question about, how do you envisage the role of men in your stories? Perhaps it's quite obvious in your cases, but Meera, do you want to go first?
So it would essentially be kind of thinking about our social strategy more so, because we had a really strong digital storytelling means for this story, and on TV we had packages as well as news hits. But the fact is that this issue still predominantly affects a huge amount of young women worldwide, and they're still seeing all of these products and the promotion of this practice mainly on social media. On Instagram, you're seeing all sorts of feeds of people kind of having IV drips to whiten their skin and all sorts of things like that. And the fact that this woman who posted on TikTok and has a good following on there managed to have a good amount of impact in Minnesota at least, because people saw what she went through and then reached out to the state as well. I think because our story did really well on social, but by promoting the story. So, we're talking about the story, people go and read the article. But if we had more time, and, this story took almost a year in the end, so, time is not always possible, but if we had it, I would have maybe wanted to work even more closely with our social team to see how we could actually story tell more so through our TikToks and platforms and so on, rather than just promote the story on those platforms and really kind of engage people more, even more.
I think that's something that we're really thinking about, right? Because as a team that works much more slowly than CNN breaking news does, we spend a lot of time thinking about the involvement, the collaboration before the story, how we report the story, and then sometimes, getting the story across the line, maybe we're also a bit haggard and tired at that point and just programming it. And so this idea of really prioritizing what we do once the story is ready is one that we need to also build time into, but I think you're absolutely right there. Can I abuse my position for a quick second and say we are really keen to get feedback. So I'm going to, because I want us to be able to finish on time, if you get your phones ready, take a picture of this QR code, because across the panels that we are organizing and that CNN as Equals has facilitated over the next few weeks, we want to hear from you about what you thought went well, what you think we should do differently. We want to solicit your feedback. So please do that so that we can actually end on the speakers and I don't have to do this bit of housekeeping at the end. Thank you. All right, Esther, there was a question for you.
To carry out a project as big as this and being a year-long project as well, the easy thing would be just to grab a handful of people who are passionate about the issues and just run with it. But practically, that will not be the right thing to do. You need to strategize, as in you get a representative from every desk and on every platform to join that committee. So you can run better that way. As I've said yesterday, I hate stories like the first woman judge, the first woman this, the first woman that. But I can't run away from it, because at the end of the day, I am a newspaper and I'm a news media. I still need to have that angle. But I can cheat. I can have a refer line to the feature section to talk about her as a person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Reade and Claire, what would you like to say to the thoughts about the role of men?
For our story, the abortion program, I think obviously the men were perpetrators. But also, thinking more critically about how we operated as a team, I think, and how the interviews went down, I think men in Nigerian culture are more used to sharing their opinions about things than women are. And so that was something I noticed doing these interviews, that the men were the deciders and the speakers oftentimes for the whole household. And so it took a while to get women talking and to they weren't necessarily used to sharing how they felt about something or what they thought about something. And so I think that was something I noticed. And also, the men were the main focus in many ways in our story, and we were careful when we talked to the women that we let them decide how they referred to themselves. So I think our editors saw the women oftentimes as victims and the men as the perpetrators, but it wasn't always that clear cut. And when the women didn't describe themselves as victims, we tried not to describe them as victims. So I think it was pretty nuanced.
So other story that I talked about was about LGBT rights and opposition and support for LGBT rights. So there are obviously men who identify as LGBT who would be affected by the anti-LGBT bill in Ghana, but it's also, and similar bills in other countries, but it's also I didn't mention this in the presentation because of time, but it's important to note that the same organized religious groups that are opposing LGBT rights in countries including Ghana often also oppose abortion and sex education and reproductive rights, and so there's a connection there as well. I would say, so this project was a feminist investigative journalism project, so that means both focusing on undercovered issues as an investigative journalist, but also I was really proud that this project was primarily produced by women and queer people. I think that was really important to it. So I'll end there.
We've had Claire, Reade, Bhanu, Esther, and Meera. Please give them all a really huge round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. The joy of being at this festival is that it is free and we can meet anywhere. So if you have further questions, please grab any of them to continue to speak about the fantastic work that they do. On the QR code you had earlier, there's a list of the other sessions we are doing. So we'll look forward to seeing you later. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you. You finished. 6 minutes.